Life throws challenges at us, and sometimes in the thick of it all, we feel like the only way to find peace is to pull away, to hit the brakes, to build a wall so high and so thick that nothing and no one can reach us. This is what they call no contact, and for some, it seems like the ultimate solution. A way to heal, a way to escape the pain, the noise, the hurt. But let me ask you something. Is that wall you're building protecting you, or is it trapping you? Think about it. No contact can feel like freedom at first. It's like slamming the door on the things that hurt you and walking away, chin up, chest out, ready to reclaim your life. And sometimes that's exactly what you need. For a time. But here's where it gets tricky. That silence, that distance, it doesn't solve the problem. It doesn't heal the wound. It just covers it up, like a Band-Aid on a deep cut. And deep down, you know it's still there. I get it. It's tempting to think, if I just cut them off, if I just disappear, I'll be fine, they'll be fine, the problem will disappear too. But life doesn't work that way, does it? Problems don't just vanish because we choose not to look at them. They sit there, waiting, festering, growing. And you might think you're free, but you're really just carrying that weight with you, dragging it along everywhere you go. Now let's talk about the flip side. Because listen, I'm not here to tell you that no contact is always wrong. Sometimes it's absolutely necessary. There are situations where it's about survival, where it's about protecting your mental health, your heart, your soul. And if that's where you are, I honor that. I see you. But for a lot of us, it's not about survival. It's about avoidance. It's about fear. Fear of confrontation. Fear of vulnerability. Fear of facing the mirror and asking, what's my part in this? Because let's be real, it's easier to walk away than it is to work things out. It's easier to close the door than it is to have the hard conversations. It's easier to ghost someone than to say, this is how you hurt me. Or even, this is how I hurt you. But here's the thing, growth doesn't happen in comfort. Healing doesn't happen in isolation. It happens when we face what scares us, what challenges us, what breaks us. It happens when we stop running and start digging, start asking the tough questions, start listening to the answers, even when they're not the ones we want to hear. And sometimes that means keeping the door open, even just a crack. Sometimes it means staying in the discomfort long enough to see what's on the other side. Because when we shut people out, we also shut out the opportunity for understanding, for growth, for reconciliation. We miss the chance to learn something, to see something, to feel something that could change everything. Life isn't black and white, my friends. It's messy. Relationships are messy. People are messy. And the answers, they're not always clear-cut. But one thing I know is this. Every single one of us was built for connection. We were made to love and to be loved. And when we cut ourselves off from that, we're cutting ourselves off from the very thing that makes us human. So before you go no contact, before you build that wall, ask yourself, is this what I really want? Is this what I really need? Am I doing this to heal, or am I doing this to hide? And most importantly, is there another way? Maybe the answer is yes, maybe the answer is no, only you can decide that. But whatever you choose, don't make it from a place of fear. Don't make it from a place of anger. Make it from a place of love, for yourself, for them, for the life you're building. Because at the end of the day, it's not about cutting people off. It's about cutting through the noise, the pain, the confusion, and finding the truth. Your truth. Their truth. The truth that sets us free. So before you close that door for good, take a moment, take a breath, and ask yourself, What am I really running from? The answer might surprise you. Before you make any big decision, whether it's walking away, shutting the door, or cutting someone out of your life, you've got to pause for a moment. I mean, really pause. Not the kind of pause where you're just catching your breath before jumping back into the chaos. I'm talking about the kind of pause where you sit with yourself, where you face yourself, where you ask the hard questions. Because here's the thing, the answer you're looking for isn't out there somewhere. It's not in their actions or their words or the way they treated you. It's in you. Now, I know that can be uncomfortable. Nobody likes sitting in the stillness, looking at their own reflection, digging into their own soul. It's so much easier to point the finger, to blame someone else, to say they're the problem, or they're the reason I feel this way. But let me tell you something. The truth doesn't live in blame. The truth lives in reflection. When you're thinking about going no contact or making any decision like it, you've got to ask yourself, why am I doing this? What am I hoping to achieve? Am I running towards something, or am I running away from something? And don't just answer the question quickly. Sit with it. Let it marinate. Because sometimes the first answer that comes to your mind isn't the real answer. It's the one you want to believe, the one that makes you feel better in the moment. But the real answer, that takes time to uncover. Maybe you're thinking, I'm doing this to protect myself. And that's valid. But protect yourself from what? From them? Or from the feelings they bring up in you? From the hurt they caused? Or from the hurt you haven't dealt with yet? You see, it's not always about them. Sometimes it's about the story we've been telling ourselves, the wounds we've been carrying, the fears we've been feeding. And let's talk about fear for a minute, because fear is sneaky. Fear will disguise itself as strength. Fear will tell you that walking away is power, that cutting someone off is control. But real strength, real power, that comes from facing what scares you, from standing in the fire and saying, I'm not afraid to feel this. I'm not afraid to deal with this. I'm not afraid to heal from this. Healing isn't passive. Healing isn't something that just happens when you're sitting in silence. Healing is active. It's work. It's messy, uncomfortable, beautiful work. And a big part of that work is self-reflection. It's asking yourself the tough questions and then being brave enough to answer them honestly. What role did I play in this situation? What patterns am I repeating? What lessons am I supposed to learn here? And here's the big one. What do I really want? Not what my ego wants, not what my pride wants, but what my heart wants. Because when you strip it all away, when you take away the anger, the hurt, the disappointment, what's left is your heart. And your heart knows the truth. Your heart knows what you need, even if your mind is too clouded to see it. But here's the catch. You've got to be willing to listen, to really listen, not to the noise, not to the chatter, not to the voice in your head that says, this is how it should be, or this is what they deserve. You've got to listen to that still, small voice inside of you, the one that whispers instead of shouts, the one that's rooted in love, not fear. And let me tell you, that voice doesn't always say what you want to hear. That voice might tell you to stay when you want to leave. That voice might tell you to forgive when you want to hold a grudge. That voice might tell you to let go when you're holding on for dear life. But whatever it says, trust that it's guiding you toward what's best for you. Self-reflection is a gift. It's an invitation to know yourself better, to love yourself more deeply, to grow into the person you were meant to be. And when you take the time to reflect, when you really sit with yourself, you'll find that the answers you've been searching for, have been inside you all along. So before you make that decision, before you take that step, take a moment, look inward, ask the hard questions, and then listen, really listen to what your heart has to say. Because the path to healing, the path to peace, the path to freedom, it doesn't start with someone else. It starts with you. You know, we live in a world where silence is often mistaken for strength, where walking away without a word is seen as the ultimate power move. But let me tell you something. Real strength doesn't come from silence. Real power isn't in cutting people off. It's in the courage to communicate. It's in the willingness to have the hard conversations, to speak your truth, and to listen, really listen. To someone else's, think about it. How many relationships, friendships, family ties, even love, have been lost because we chose silence over words? Because we let misunderstandings fester, let assumptions take root, let pride build walls instead of bridges. Communication, my friends, is the foundation of every connection we have. Without it, we're just islands, drifting further and further apart. Now, I know what you're thinking, but they don't deserve my words. They don't deserve my time. And maybe you're right. Maybe they don't. But here's the thing. Communication isn't just about them. It's about you. It's about freeing yourself from the weight of what's unsaid. It's about clearing the air, not for their sake, but for yours. You see, when we choose silence, we're not just shutting them out. We're shutting ourselves in. We're locking away our thoughts, our feelings, our truth, and carrying it all around like a heavy bag on our shoulders. But when we speak, when we open up and let those words out, it's like dropping that bag to the ground. It's liberating. It's healing. And let's not forget the power of listening. Because communication isn't a one-way street. It's not just about saying your piece and walking away. It's about creating a space where both sides can be heard, where both sides can be seen, where understanding can take root, even if agreement doesn't. That's the thing about communication. It doesn't always lead to a resolution. It doesn't always fix the problem or mend the relationship. But what it does is create clarity. It lets you know where you stand. It lets them know where they stand. And that clarity, that's where peace begins. Now, I'm not saying it's easy. Communication takes courage. It takes vulnerability. It takes being willing to sit in the discomfort of someone else's pain, their anger, their truth, even when it doesn't align with yours. It takes being willing to say, "This is how I feel," and to hear, "This is how you made me feel," without shutting down, without fighting back, without running away. But let me tell you, there's beauty in that vulnerability. There's power in that honesty. Because when you communicate, you're not just speaking words. You're opening doors. You're building bridges. You're giving yourself and the other person a chance to grow, to heal, to understand. And here's the thing about bridges. They don't just connect 2 points. They also give you a way to walk away, not in anger, not in silence, but in peace. That's the power of communication. It doesn't always keep people together, but it can help you part ways with dignity, with grace, with love. So before you decide to cut someone off, ask yourself, have I said everything I needed to say? Have I given them a chance to say what they need to say? Have I done everything I can to understand, to be understood? Because once you go no contact, once you close that door, those opportunities are gone. And let me tell you, regret is a heavy thing to carry. Sometimes all it takes is one conversation, one moment of honesty, one act of courage, one decision to speak, instead of staying silent. That's all it takes to change the course of a relationship, to mend what's broken, to find closure, to move forward. And even if the conversation doesn't change the outcome, it will change you. It will give you the peace of knowing you tried. Because at the end of the day, communication isn't about winning. It's not about proving who's right or wrong. It's about connection. It's about understanding. It's about being brave enough to say, this is who I am, this is how I feel, and to let someone else do the same. So don't let silence be your story. Don't let fear write the ending. Speak your truth, hear theirs, and trust that whatever comes next, you'll face it with strength, with clarity, with peace. Life is complicated, isn't it? Relationships even more so. We don't live in a world where everything fits neatly into boxes, where every problem has a simple solution. And when it comes to the people in our lives, the ones we're tied to in ways we can't always explain or escape, family, lifelong friends, even those we've loved deeply, walking away might feel like the easiest thing to do. But easy doesn't always mean right. You see, in this life, we're not just dealing with people. We're dealing with histories, with connections, with bonds that have been shaped over years. Sometimes those bonds are messy. Sometimes they're frayed, stretched to their limit. But does that mean they're beyond saving? Does that mean the only way forward is to cut them off completely? I don't think so. There's a difference between setting boundaries and building walls. Boundaries protect you. They say, this is where I end and you begin. They say, I love you, but I can't let you hurt me. Walls, though? Walls shut everything out. The good, the bad, the lessons, the possibilities. And sometimes, in our pain, in our frustration, we confuse the two. We think we're setting boundaries when really we're just putting up walls because it's easier than dealing with the mess. But life isn't about easy, it's about real. And real means looking at those complicated relationships and asking yourself, what can I do to make this better? Not perfect, better. Because perfection isn't the goal. Connection is. Growth is. Healing is. Maybe it's a parent who never quite gave you what you needed. Maybe it's a sibling who always seems to push your buttons. Maybe it's a friend who betrayed your trust. Those relationships can be hard. They can be painful. But they can also be the ones that teach you the most about yourself, if you're willing to do the work. And the work isn't about fixing them. It's about finding a way to coexist, to communicate, to create a relationship that honors both who you are and who they are. It's about saying, I see you, flaws and all, and I'm willing to try. It's about choosing love over fear, patience over anger, understanding over judgment. Now, don't get me wrong, there are times when you've done all you can, when the other person just isn't willing or able to meet you halfway. And in those cases, it's okay to step back, to protect yourself, to let go of what isn't serving you. But letting go doesn't always mean going no contact. Sometimes it means redefining the relationship. It means limiting your interactions, setting clear boundaries, finding a middle ground that allows you to stay connected without sacrificing your peace. Because here's the truth. Some relationships aren't meant to be all or nothing. They're meant to be somewhere in between. And in that in-between space, there's room for growth, for understanding, for a kind of love that's imperfect, but still worth holding on to. One day at a time. I've seen people walk away from relationships they thought were beyond repair, only to look back years later with regret, with questions about what might have been if they just tried a little harder, held on a little longer. And I've seen people stay in relationships that weren't easy, that weren't perfect, but that taught them lessons they couldn't have learned any other way. Slavery, bitterness, hostility, violence, hatred. The key is knowing the difference, knowing when to hold on and when to let go, knowing when to fight for the relationship and when to fight for yourself. And that knowledge doesn't come from a place of anger or pride. It comes from a place of clarity, of self-awareness, of love. So before you decide to cut someone off completely, take a step back. Ask yourself, is there a way to set boundaries here without building walls? Is there a way to protect myself while still keeping the door open, even just a crack? Is there something to be learned, something to be salvaged, something to be cherished in this relationship? Life is short, but it's also long. Long enough to mend what's broken, to rebuild what's been lost, to find new ways of being in relationship with the people who matter most to you. And in the end, those relationships, no matter how complicated, are what make this life worth living. Believe me, I understand what you're feeling. So don't be so quick to write someone off. Don't be so quick to say, I'm done. Because sometimes what feels like the end is really just the beginning of something new, something better, something more honest and real. And if you're willing to do the work, if you're willing to stay open, to set boundaries instead of building walls, you might just find that those messy, complicated, imperfect relationships are the ones that bring you the most growth, the most love, the most joy. You ever notice how much easier it is to see someone else's flaws than your own? How we can dissect their mistakes, their shortcomings, their faults, like we're experts in their lives. But when it comes to our own, suddenly we're blind? That's human nature, isn't it? It's easier to point the finger outward than to turn it inward. But here's the thing. Growth doesn't come from pointing fingers. Growth comes from holding up a mirror. Growth comes from holding up a mirror. When you're considering walking away from someone, cutting ties, going no contact, you have to ask yourself, am I doing this because of them, or is there something in me I need to address first? It's a tough question, one most people don't want to answer, because it forces us to look at our own reflection, to confront our own role in the situation. But you can't heal what you don't face. You can't grow if you're always running from your part in the story. Let's be real. Relationships are never one-sided. Even in the most challenging dynamics, there's a give and take. Sometimes it's what we allow. Sometimes it's what we overlook. And sometimes it's what we bring to the table. Our baggage, our triggers, our unspoken expectations. So before you close the door on someone else, take a moment to ask yourself, what am I carrying into this relationship? What am I holding on to that's shaping how I see them, how I interact with them, how I respond to them? Maybe it's an old wound, something that has nothing to do with them, but everything to do with how you've been hurt before. Maybe it's a story you've been telling yourself, a belief about who they are or what they mean to you, that's more about your fears than their actions. Or maybe, just maybe, it's a lesson you haven't learned yet. One that keeps showing up in different people, in different situations, until you finally face it. The truth is, relationships are mirrors. They reflect back to us not just who the other person is, but who we are. Our strengths, our weaknesses, our insecurities, our patterns. And sometimes, what we see in that reflection isn't pretty. But that's where the work is. That's where the healing is. Now, let me be clear. This isn't about blaming yourself for someone else's behavior. It's not about excusing hurtful actions or taking on responsibility that isn't yours. It's about accountability. Your accountability. It's about recognizing that while you can't control what they do, you can control how you respond. You can control the energy you bring, the boundaries you set, the stories you choose to believe. And here's the powerful thing about accountability. It puts the power back in your hands. When you stop waiting for someone else to change, to apologize, to make things right, you free yourself. You take ownership of your own healing, your own growth, your own peace. That's why self-reflection is so important before you make any big decision about a relationship. Because if you don't take the time to look inward, to understand your own role in the dynamic, you risk carrying the same issues, the same patterns into your next relationship. You might walk away from one person only to find yourself in the same situation with someone new. It's not about perfection. Nobody's perfect, not you, not them. It's about awareness. It's about growth. It's about being willing to say, I see where I went wrong and I'm going to work on that. Because when you grow, when you heal, when you change, it changes the dynamic of every relationship you're in. End quote. And sometimes that growth opens the door to reconciliation. Sometimes, when you do the inner work, you realize the problem wasn't as big as it seemed. You realize that what felt like a wall was really just a misunderstanding, a misstep, a moment that could be mended with time, effort, and communication. But even if it doesn't lead to reconciliation, that inner work is never wasted, because it's not just about that one relationship. It's about every relationship you'll ever have, including the one you have with yourself. So before you decide that no contact is the answer, take a step back. Take a long, hard look in the mirror. Ask yourself the tough questions, the ones that make you uncomfortable, the ones that force you to face the parts of yourself you'd rather ignore. Because the more you understand yourself, the more you can navigate your relationships with clarity, with compassion, with grace. And maybe, just maybe, you'll find that the reflection staring back at you isn't just a collection of flaws and mistakes. It's a person who's learning, growing, evolving. A person who's capable of love, of forgiveness, of connection. A person who's worthy of the same. You know, we live in a time when cutting people off has almost become a badge of honor. No contact is the phrase we throw around like it's the ultimate solution, the cure for every toxic relationship, every disagreement, every moment when someone fails us. It's quick, it's simple, it's final. But the truth is, life is rarely that black and white. Relationships aren't that simple. And when we treat them as if they are, we risk losing something far greater than the comfort of distance. We risk losing the opportunity for growth, for understanding, for something deeper. When we choose no contact, we often frame it as self-care. And sometimes it is. Sometimes it's necessary to protect your peace, your heart, your mental well-being. But other times it's not self-care, it's self-protection. It's a way of avoiding the hard stuff, the discomfort, the vulnerability, the work of facing not just them, but ourselves. Because staying connected, even in a limited way, takes courage. It takes strength. It takes the willingness to navigate the messy, uncomfortable middle ground where real connection and healing happen. Let me tell you something about distance. Physical distance can give you space. Yes, it can give you room to breathe, to reflect, to gather your strength. But emotional distance? That's a different story. Emotional distance doesn't heal wounds, it just hides them. It buries them under layers of silence, of unresolved feelings, of words left unsaid. And the longer they stay buried, the harder they are to dig up when the time comes, if the time comes. See, the thing about relationships, about people, is that they're complicated. People mess up, they say the wrong things, they act out of their own pain, their own fears, their own insecurities, and you know what? So do you. So do I. We all do. That's the human condition. But if we go through life expecting perfection, If we expect people to always get it right, to never hurt us, to never disappoint us, we're setting ourselves up for a lifetime of loneliness. Because relationships, the real, meaningful ones, aren't about avoiding hurt. They're about navigating it together. They're about saying, "You hurt me, but I'm willing to work through it." Or, "I made a mistake, and I want to make it right." They're about learning to live in the tension between love and imperfection, between connection and conflict, between what is and what we wish it could be. That's why no contact should never be the default. It should never be the easy answer. Because when we choose to sever ties completely, we cut off not just the pain, but the possibility of growth, the possibility of reconciliation, the possibility of discovering something new about ourselves, about them, about what it means to truly love and forgive and connect. Now, I know what you're thinking, but some people don't deserve that. Some people are toxic. Some people don't change. And you're right. There are times when no contact is the only way to protect yourself, when it's the healthiest choice you can make. But even then, it's not about punishment. It's not about anger or resentment or proving a point. It's about love. Love for yourself, love for them, love for the possibility that time and distance might create space for something better down the line. But when we rush to no contact without asking ourselves the hard questions, without examining our own role, without considering the other person's perspective, without trying to communicate, to heal, to grow, then we're not protecting ourselves. We're robbing ourselves of the chance to do the hard but necessary work that makes us better, stronger, more compassionate human beings. And here's the thing. Relationships are mirrors. They show us who we are, not just in our best moments, but in our worst ones. They challenge us. They push us. They force us to confront the parts of ourselves we'd rather ignore. And yes, sometimes they hurt us. But they also teach us. They teach us how to love, how to forgive, how to let go, not of the person, but of the anger, the bitterness, the pride that keeps us from connecting. So before you decide to cut someone off, before you choose silence over words, distance over understanding, ask yourself, is this really what I want? Or is it just what feels easier right now? Because the easy path isn't always the right one. The right path is the one that challenges you, the one that forces you to grow, the one that leads you step by step to a deeper understanding of yourself and the people around you. Life is short, but it's also long enough to try, long enough to make mistakes, to learn from them, to repair what's been broken, long enough to love and be loved, not perfectly, but honestly. And in the end, that's what really matters. Not the people we walked away from, but the ones we stayed connected to, even when it was hard, especially when it was hard.